From the muddy battlefields of France to the scorching deserts of North Africa, from the jungles of Burma to the contested hills of Italy, British vehicles played a crucial and often underestimated role in World War II. In this comprehensive exploration, we'll examine every major British vehicle that rolled, rumbled, and roared into battle during the war. From the tanks that faced Rommel's Afrika Korps to the humble trucks that kept armies supplied, from armored cars racing across the desert to the motorcycles that carried vital messages under fire. Each vehicle had its purpose, and each left its mark on history. Tanks. The light tank Mark VI was the backbone of the British Army's armored forces at the outbreak of war, representing the pre-war thinking that emphasized reconnaissance over firepower. First entering service in 1936, this small, lightly armored tank was armed with nothing more than machine guns, making it completely outmatched by German armor during the disastrous Battle of France in May and June 1940. It was fast, though, capable of over 35 miles per hour, which made it valuable for reconnaissance work when operating ahead of heavier formations. But when British light tank squadrons encountered German Panzer IIIs and IVs, the results were catastrophic. The Mark VI thin armor could be penetrated by almost any anti-tank weapon, and it lacked any means to fight back effectively against enemy armor. The light tank Mark VII Tetrarch was a fascinating evolutionary step introduced in 1940. This little tank featured a unique steering mechanism that used controlled track braking, which was genuinely innovative for its time. Most famously, the Tetrarch was specifically designed to be air-portable, light enough to be carried by Hamilcar gliders. It saw its most notable action with British airborne forces during the D-Day landings in June 1944, when a handful were successfully glided into Normandy to provide armored support for the lightly equipped paratroopers. While its combat effectiveness was limited by its light armament and thin armor, the mere presence of any tank supporting airborne forces was psychologically valuable. Moving on to the infantry tank Mark I, better known as Matilda I. Talk about basic design philosophy taken to its extreme. Introduced in 1938, the Matilda Mark I was heavily armored for its size and era, designed specifically to support infantry assaults at walking pace. But it was armed only with a single machine gun, making it utterly incapable of engaging enemy tanks. It represented the clearest example of 1930s British infantry tank doctrine: slow, heavily protected, but lacking any anti-tank capability. It was painfully slow at just 8 miles per hour and proved nearly useless once the war actually began.
The infantry tank Mark II Matilda II was an entirely different proposition. Introduced in 1939, this became the queen of the desert during the early North African campaigns of 1940 and 1941. The Matilda Mark II's thick armor, up to 78 millimeters in places, made it nearly impervious to Italian anti-tank guns and the early German 37 millimeter anti-tank weapons encountered in the Western Desert. During Operation Compass in December 1940, Matildas spearheaded the devastating British offensive that destroyed multiple Italian divisions, advancing hundreds of miles and capturing over 130,000 prisoners. It was a genuine nightmare for Axis forces until the Germans deployed their 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns in the anti-tank role and introduced more powerful tank guns that could finally penetrate its armor. Next up, the Valentine, produced in more variants than almost any other British tank design. The Valentine was a truly versatile infantry tank that entered service in 1940 and proved remarkably reliable throughout its service life. It was produced in massive numbers, over 8,000 built, arguably more than any other British tank of the war. British, Canadian, and Soviet forces all employed it extensively. The Valentine served in North Africa, the Western Desert, Italy, and on the Eastern Front, where the Soviet Union received thousands through Lend-Lease. Its reliability was legendary, and it became the basis for several highly successful self-propelled gun conversions. The Valentine Mark XI, introduced later in the war, featured improved armament and became one of the final production variants. The Churchill, available in numerous marks, including the specialized Churchill NA-75, was one of the war's most distinctive tanks. What a remarkably sturdy machine it proved to be. First entering service in 1941, during the rushed development following Dunkirk, the Churchill was heavily armored and genuinely loved by its crews, especially for its superb cross-country performance and ability to climb obstacles that stopped other tanks completely. Early versions suffered from mechanical problems and inadequate armament, but continuous improvement led to the Churchill Mark VII, introduced in 1944, which became one of the toughest and most reliable Allied tanks of the entire war. The Churchill NA-75 was a field modification that mounted the American 75mm gun to give British units firepower comparable to the Sherman. Churchills served with distinction in North Africa, Italy, and Northwest Europe, earning a reputation for near indestructibility. The cruiser tank Mark IV represented Britain's attempt to create fast, mobile tanks for exploitation and pursuit. Introduced in 1938, this tank brought the revolutionary Christie suspension system to British service, making it considerably faster than the infantry tanks at up to 30 miles per hour. It was used extensively during the early desperate fighting in France in 1940 and throughout the North African campaigns, where its speed advantage proved valuable for outflanking maneuvers. However, its thin armor made it vulnerable, and mechanical reliability was questionable.
Moving on, the cruiser tank Mark VI Crusader became the defining British tank during the height of the Desert War from 1941 to 1942. Introduced in 1941, the Crusader was quick at 27 miles per hour and produced in substantial numbers, over 5,000 built, becoming the primary British cruiser tank during critical battles like Operation Crusader and the fighting around Gazala. But, it suffered from notoriously poor mechanical reliability, with cooling system failures and chronic breakdowns plaguing units equipped with it. Crews respected its speed, but cursed its fragility. By 1943, it was being phased out in favor of American Shermans and the improved British Cromwell. The Cromwell represented a major step forward for British tank design when it entered service in 1943. It was genuinely fast, capable of 40 miles per hour, making it one of the speediest tanks of the war. More importantly, it was reliable and reasonably powerful, mounting either a 6-pounder or 75mm gun, depending on the variant. The Cromwell was the first British tank to use the superb Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, essentially a detuned Merlin aircraft engine, which provided outstanding power and reliability. It served primarily in Northwest Europe from D-Day onward, equipping armored reconnaissance regiments where its speed was invaluable. A true classic of British wartime engineering. Next up, the Comet. This was arguably the best British cruiser tank of the entire war, representing the culmination of years of hard-learned lessons. Introduced in late 1944, the Comet mounted the fantastic 77mm high-velocity gun, essentially a rebored 17-pounder designed to fit in a smaller turret, giving it the ability to engage German Panthers and Tigers on more equal terms. It combined the Cromwell's excellent Meteor engine with thicker armor, better suspension, and that powerful gun. It arrived late, only seeing significant combat in the final months of the war during the Rhine crossings and the advance into Germany, but its performance was truly outstanding. Had it arrived a year earlier, it might have changed the course of armored warfare in Europe. The Sherman Firefly deserves special mention as Britain's most important tank conversion of the war. The Firefly was Britain's ingenious answer to the formidable German tanks like the Panther and Tiger. By fitting the incredibly powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun, Britain's finest anti-tank weapon, into the turret of an American M4 Sherman, British engineers created one of the most feared Allied tanks on the battlefield. First deployed in Normandy in June 1944, the Firefly could penetrate German heavy armor at ranges that standard Shermans couldn't dream of achieving. German tank crews quickly learned to identify and target Fireflies first, recognizing the mortal threat they posed. British and Commonwealth armored units typically included one Firefly in each troop of 4 tanks, providing the armor-killing punch the standard 75mm Shermans lacked.
Self-propelled guns. The Bishop 25-pounder SPG represented an early British attempt at creating mobile artillery. Introduced in 1942, it mounted the excellent 25-pounder gun howitzer on a Valentine tank chassis. Unfortunately, the high mounting structure and limited turret traverse gave it very poor elevation, restricting its range to just 6,400 yards, considerably less than the towed version of the same gun could achieve. It served primarily in North Africa during 1942 and early 1943, providing mobile fire support during the critical battles around El Alamein. It was largely phased out after the North African campaign ended, replaced by better designs. The Deacon 6-pounder SPG was a truly unique improvised solution born from the desperate circumstances of the Desert War. Introduced in 1942, it was essentially a 6-pounder anti-tank gun mounted awkwardly high on an armored AEC Matador truck chassis. This unconventional vehicle provided mobile anti-tank punch against German armored cars and light tanks, though its high silhouette made it dangerously visible. Only about 175 were built, serving primarily in North Africa, where the open terrain allowed its mobility to be exploited. Next on the list, the Archer 17-pounder SP on Valentine chassis. Now this was genuinely clever British engineering at work. Introduced in 1944, the Archer mounted the immense 17-pounder gun facing backward on a modified Valentine chassis, an unconventional configuration that actually made tactical sense. This arrangement allowed the vehicle to quickly shoot and then immediately drive away forward without turning around, protecting the crew during dangerous fire missions against German armor. The rearward-facing gun also helped manage the tremendous recoil. Archers served effectively from late 1944 through the end of the war in Northwest Europe, providing British infantry divisions with highly mobile anti-tank capability. The Churchill gun carrier mounting a 3-inch gun was a heavy self-propelled gun designed primarily during the invasion scare of 1940-1941 for home defense. It mounted a powerful 3-inch anti-aircraft gun in a limited traverse mounting on a Churchill chassis, intended to provide heavy direct fire support against potential German landing forces. Fortunately, only about 50 were built, as its tactical utility proved extremely limited once the invasion passed. Most never saw combat. Armored and scout cars. The Daimler armored car is regarded by many historians and veterans as the best Allied armored car of the entire war. Introduced in 1941, it was fast at 50 miles per hour, heavily protected with well-sloped armor, and featured a powerful 2-pounder gun in a small turret. This superb reconnaissance vehicle served throughout North Africa, Italy, and Northwest Europe, providing reliable scouting and fire support. Its 4-wheel drive and excellent cross-country performance made it invaluable for reconnaissance squadrons operating ahead of main forces. The Humber armored car became the most widely produced British heavy armored car of the war, with over 5,400 built between 1941 and 1945. It was reliable, very sturdy, and served on almost every front where British forces fought, from the Western Desert to Burma, from Italy to Northwest Europe. The Humber often operated alongside the lighter Daimler, providing a balanced reconnaissance capability. Later Marks mounted increasingly powerful armament, with the Mark IV carrying a 37mm gun. Moving on to the Humber light reconnaissance car.
This compact armored car was designed specifically in 1940 for patrol and liaison duties behind the front lines. It provided light protection for its two-man crew, driver and commander, making it perfect for scouting work where speed and low profile mattered more than firepower. Thousands served throughout the war in secondary roles. The AEC armored car looked almost like a tank, with its substantial size and firepower. Based on the AEC Matador artillery tractor chassis and introduced in 1941, it was heavily armed compared to other armored cars. Later models, particularly the AEC Mark III introduced in 1944, even mounted a 75mm gun, giving it serious battlefield capability that rivaled some light tanks. It served primarily in Italy and Northwest Europe, where its firepower proved valuable in urban fighting. Next up, the standard Beaverette. Here we have a perfect example of British desperation and improvisation during the darkest days. The Beaverette was an emergency armored vehicle hastily built on a standard civilian car chassis in 1940 during the invasion scare following Dunkirk. It was intended purely for home defense, providing something, anything, with armor protection for airfield guards and vital installations. Thousands were produced in various improvised forms, armed typically with a single light machine gun. Fortunately, they never faced combat against a German invasion. The Daimler Scout car, nicknamed the Dingo, was an utterly essential compact four-wheeled reconnaissance vehicle that entered service in 1939. It was incredibly agile, and its innovative four-wheel steering, allowing it to steer with both front and rear wheels, made it almost impossible to trap in tight spots. Dingo crews could reverse at high speed while maintaining control, a crucial survival trait when retreating from contact. Over 6,600 were built, serving in every theater. Its low silhouette and speed made it perfect for sneaking close to enemy positions to gather intelligence. The Humber Scout car was essentially an enlarged version of the famous Dingo, introduced in 1942. It offered more internal space for radios and equipment, better crew comfort for extended patrols, and slightly heavier armament. Though it wasn't quite as agile as the smaller Daimler model due to its size and conventional steering, it proved highly successful in reconnaissance roles throughout Italy and Northwest Europe. The Morris Light Reconnaissance Car represented another important early light reconnaissance vehicle from 1940. It was characterized by its simple construction with angled armor plates and an open top, seeing wide use early in the North African and Italian campaigns. While less sophisticated than the Dingo, its simplicity made it easy to maintain under field conditions. Moving on, the Guy armored car was one of the first British armored cars produced in significant numbers at the start of the war in 1939. It featured a turret-mounted machine gun or small cannon and four-wheel drive. The Guy quickly became the basis for the more standardized and ultimately more successful Humber armored car series, with many design features carried forward. The Lanchester 6x4 armored car was actually a design relic from the late 1920s, representing obsolete interwar thinking. Despite its considerable age and outdated design, it saw service early in the war, particularly in the Far East and Middle East, performing convoy protection and patrol duties in areas where more modern vehicles were unavailable. Its six-wheeled configuration and reliable mechanics kept it useful in secondary theaters. Carriers. The Universal Carrier, known affectionately as the Bren gun carrier, though it carried far more than just Bren guns, was the quintessential British tracked vehicle of World War II. First introduced in 1940 as a standardized version of earlier carrier designs, thousands upon thousands were produced, over 113,000 in total, making it one of the most produced armored fighting vehicles in history. They were used for absolutely everything imaginable: transporting infantry sections, towing anti-tank guns, carrying supplies forward under fire, mounting machine guns, serving as mortar carriers, and even functioning as armored ambulances. Truly universal in application, they served with British, Commonwealth, and Allied forces in every theater of the war. Their open-top design made crews vulnerable to shell fragments and small arms fire, but their mobility and versatility made them indispensable. The Wasp was a fearsome flamethrower variant of the Universal Carrier, introduced in 1942. This specialized version took the standard carrier chassis and fitted it with a Ronson flamethrower system, creating a terrifying weapon for clearing enemy bunkers, pillboxes, and heavily fortified positions. The Wasp proved highly effective during the brutal fighting in Normandy and the subsequent advance across Europe, where German defenders learned to fear its approach. Its range was limited to about 80 yards, requiring crews to close to point-blank range, an act of considerable courage. Next up, the Lloyd carrier. This carrier was often used specifically for towing anti-tank guns, such as the 6-pounder and later the 17-pounder. Introduced in 1940, it had a different engine layout and configuration than the Universal Carrier, mounting the engine at the front, making it a powerful and reliable tow vehicle. Over 26,000 were produced, providing essential mobility for British anti-tank units. The Windsor Carrier was essentially a lengthened version of the Universal Carrier, developed in Canada from 1943. The extra length, adding about a foot to the hull, greatly improved its load-carrying capacity and provided better weight distribution for improved cross-country performance. It served primarily with Canadian forces in Italy and Northwest Europe. Specialist and engineering vehicles. The Churchill AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, was a combat engineer tank that became essential for breaching fortifications. Introduced in 1943 specifically for the anticipated D-Day landings, this specialized Churchill variant mounted a massive 290mm petard spigot mortar, known affectionately as the Flying Dustbin due to the shape of its projectile. This short-range weapon could demolish concrete bunkers, blow gaps in walls, and destroy obstacles with devastating effect. AVREs led the way during the Normandy landings, clearing beach obstacles and enemy strongpoints. They continued serving throughout the Northwest Europe campaign, essential for urban fighting and fortification reduction. The Churchill Crocodile was perhaps the most psychologically terrifying flamethrower tank of the entire war. Introduced in 1944, the Crocodile towed a large armored trailer containing 400 gallons of fuel, connected to the tank by an armored pipe. Its flamethrower could project flame up to 120 yards, incinerating everything in its path. The psychological effect on German defenders was utterly devastating. Entire positions would surrender rather than face the crocodile's flames. Over 800 were produced, serving from Normandy through to the war's end. The Churchill Ark, Armored Ramp Carrier, was an ingenious bridge-laying vehicle introduced in 1943. This turretless Churchill drove directly into anti-tank ditches or up against vertical obstacles, then extended ramps, allowing other tanks and vehicles to simply drive across its body like a mobile bridge. Very specialized, but absolutely crucial during the assault on heavily defended positions. Next on the list, the Churchill Bobbin Carpet Layer. What an unusual name for an unusual vehicle. Introduced in 1943 specifically for the D-Day landings, this vehicle unrolled a massive canvas or coconut matting carpet directly in front of it as it advanced. This was vital for crossing soft sand or sticky clay beach surfaces that would bog down conventional vehicles, especially during the Normandy landings, where beach conditions threatened to stall the invasion. The Churchill Crocodile represented simple, robust engineering, solving a basic problem. This vehicle carried a huge cylindrical bundle of brushwood, called a fascine, on its hull front. When encountering a ditch or tank trap, the fascine was simply dropped in, creating a temporary crossing point that tanks could drive across. Fascines had been used since World War I, and they remained effective in World War II.
Trucks and soft-skin vehicles. The Bedford QL series was perhaps the most recognizable British four-wheel drive truck of the war. Introduced in 1941, it became the absolute workhorse for the British Army, serving in enormous numbers. Bedford QLs were used for troop transport, towing artillery pieces, serving as mobile workshops, mounting anti-aircraft guns, and hauling supplies across every terrain, from desert sand to European mud. Over 52,000 were built, making it synonymous with British military logistics. The Bedford MW was the standard smaller 1,500-weight truck, introduced in 1939. This compact, simple, and rugged vehicle was widely used, especially early in the war, for general duties and carrying smaller loads in areas where full-size trucks were unnecessary. Its reliability and ease of maintenance made it popular. Moving on to the Bedford WWII. This vehicle was a standard 3-ton load capacity truck introduced in 1939 that formed the majority of the British Army's supply line motor transport throughout the war. A true logistics backbone, WWII trucks carried everything from ammunition to rations, from spare parts to medical supplies, keeping British forces supplied across North Africa, Italy, and Europe. Tens of thousands served. The Austin K2Y ambulance became the iconic British military ambulance of the war. Known affectionately as simply the K2, this dedicated ambulance variant, introduced in 1939, saved countless lives by rapidly evacuating wounded soldiers from frontline aid stations to rear-area hospitals. Its distinctive box body appearance, with red cross markings, made it instantly recognizable on every battlefield. Crews operated under horrific conditions, often under fire, bringing medical care within reach of dying men. Next up, the Austin Tilly. The Tilly was a light utility vehicle based on a civilian Austin saloon, introduced in 1939. They were mainly used for running messages between headquarters, transporting officers, and performing light duties on airfields and home stations. Very common, very useful for the thousand small tasks armies require, even if unglamorous. The Ford WWII was a common light utility vehicle and 1,500-weight truck built in massive numbers under the British War Office Standardized Truck Program. Introduced in 1940, this simple, no-frills Ford design provided reliable light transport for countless units. The Ford WWII was a reliable 3-ton capacity 6-wheeled truck, also built under the War Office program from 1940. This robust design, with its driven rear axles, ensured supplies could get through even over rough European terrain, muddy tracks, and bombed roads. The Morris C8 Quad was the famous and ubiquitous tractor for the 25-pounder gun howitzer, Britain's standard field artillery piece. Introduced in 1939, the Quad's four-wheel drive and compact shape made it perfect for towing this essential gun across challenging ground, from desert wadis to Normandy hedgerows. Its crew compartment carried the gun detachment and initial ammunition supply. Over 10,000 were built. Moving on, the AEC Matador was a truly powerful medium artillery tractor introduced in 1939. This 4x4 vehicle was essential for towing the heaviest British field guns, such as the 5.5-inch medium howitzer and the 4.5-inch gun. The Matador was incredibly reliable, with excellent cross-country performance that allowed these heavy guns to keep pace with advancing armies. Over 9,000 served throughout the war. The Scammell Pioneer was an impressive heavy recovery vehicle. What a beast this was! Introduced in 1935, but serving throughout the war, this massive 6-wheeled recovery truck was indispensable for recovering bogged-down or battle-damaged tanks from the battlefield. Its powerful winches could pull even the heaviest Churchill or Sherman from mud or craters, returning valuable armor to service.
pioneer crews risked their lives working under fire to recover disabled tanks. Next up, the Austin K5. This vehicle was a robust 3-ton four-wheel drive truck introduced in 1941. It was widely used for general cargo duties in all theaters of the war, complementing the output of Bedford and other manufacturers to provide the vast truck fleet British logistics required. Motorcycles. The BSA M20 was the most numerous British military motorcycle of the entire war, with over 126,000 produced between 1937 and 1945. It was famously rugged and reliable, if somewhat slow with a top speed of only about 60 miles per hour. But it was absolutely essential for dispatch riders carrying messages between headquarters when radio silence was necessary or radios unavailable. BSA M20s also served in military police duties, reconnaissance, and convoy escort. The distinctive thump of its single-cylinder engine became a familiar sound wherever British forces served. The Norton 16H was the original British military workhorse motorcycle, serving from the 1930s right through to 1945 alongside the BSA. First adopted in 1937, this classic motorcycle provided reliable service for scouting patrols, liaison duties between units, and carrying dispatches. While eventually supplemented by the BSA M20 in terms of numbers, Nortons remained in frontline service throughout, trusted by riders who appreciated their solid engineering. Next up, the matchless G3L. This motorcycle introduced crucial telescopic front forks in 1941, a real innovation at the time that provided vastly superior handling compared to the older rigid fork designs of the BSA and Norton. This gave it better stability over rough ground and improved rider comfort on long runs, making it very popular with dispatch riders who spent hours in the saddle daily under all conditions. The Royal Enfield WD/RE Flying Flea was a remarkable little machine designed for a very specific purpose. This tiny, lightweight 125cc motorcycle was specially designed in 1939 to be dropped by parachute in a special container. The Flying Flea was used extensively by British airborne troops for crucial quick transport immediately after parachute or glider landings, allowing paratroopers to rapidly scout surrounding areas or carry messages before heavier vehicles could arrive. Hundreds were dropped during D-Day and subsequent airborne operations. Finally, the Excelsior Well bike was another specialized airborne marvel. Introduced in 1942, this was a truly tiny folding motorcycle that could fit inside a standard cylindrical parachute container for dropping alongside paratroopers. Used primarily by British Special Forces, commandos, and paratroopers, the Well bike provided rapid reconnaissance capability after landing. Its compact size, when folded, made it ideal for covert operations, and despite its small 98cc engine, it could reach 30 miles per hour, enough for quick dashes to gather intelligence or escape contact. These were the machines that carried Britain through its darkest hour and toward ultimate victory, from the desperate days after Dunkirk, when anything with armor was precious, through the grinding desert campaigns where reliability meant survival, to the final triumphant advance across Europe. Some of these vehicles were brilliant designs that influenced armor development for decades. Others were flawed, compromised by pre-war thinking, or rushed into production before proper testing. Many were simply adequate, good enough to do the job asked of them under impossible circumstances. But every vehicle in this account represents more than steel and rubber, more than engineering specifications and production numbers. Each one carried men, young men mostly, barely out of school, who climbed aboard knowing the risks. Tank crews who burned to death in seconds when armor-piercing rounds found them. Truck drivers who drove through artillery barrages to bring ammunition forward. Dispatch riders who raced through enemy fire, carrying messages that might save hundreds of lives. Ambulance crews who worked until exhaustion, carrying shattered bodies toward hope. The vehicles themselves have mostly gone to scrapyards and museums now, melted down for peacetime steel or preserved behind velvet ropes. But they served their purpose when civilization itself hung in the balance. They carried a generation through the fire, and in doing so, they earned their place in history beside the men who drove them, fought in them, and far too often died in them.